Mukden, Manchuria, February 25, 1905. A Russian artillery commander stares in disbelief as his gun positions explode one by one along the defensive line. Shells are landing with terrifying accuracy, direct hits on cannons placed on hilltops, wiping out crews, destroying equipment. Within 10 minutes, most of his batteries are gone, but where is the fire coming from? He sweeps the horizon with his binoculars. Nothing. No muzzle flashes. No smoke rising from distant ridges. Just open landscape. And the relentless sound of incoming shells. His surviving gunners desperately spin their weapons around, searching for something to shoot back at. They find nothing. The Japanese artillery is completely hidden. Firing from positions miles behind mountain ranges, invisible to every Russian eye on the battlefield. On a hilltop overlooking Russian lines, a single Japanese observer sits quietly next to a field telephone. A wooden box with a hand crank and copper wires running down the mountainside. Through his telescope, he watches where the shells land, adjusts his numbers, turns the crank, and speaks calmly into the receiver. Elevation +2 degrees. Azimuth unchanged. Fire for effect. Miles away, Japanese gunners who cannot see a single target receive the message, adjust their cannons using pure mathematics, and fire another devastating salvo. This was the birth of modern indirect artillery fire. And the Russians were being taken apart by guns they could not see, could not find, and could not fight back against. The Russo-Japanese War began in February 1904, driven by competing ambitions in Manchuria and Korea. Russia had been expanding eastward for centuries, leasing Port Arthur from China, building the Trans-Siberian Railroad, and establishing a strong presence in Manchuria. Japan, which had been rapidly modernizing since the Meiji Restoration of 1868, feared that Russian expansion would cut off Japanese interests on the Asian mainland. On February 8, 1904, Japan launched a surprise torpedo attack on the Russian Pacific Fleet at Port Arthur, without a declaration of war, and shocked the world by showing that an Asian nation could take on a European empire and win. The land war centered on Manchuria. Japanese forces swept through Korea, pushed north, and fought major battles at Liaoyang and the Shaho River in the autumn of 1904, forcing the Russians back each time. Port Arthur fell in January 1905 after a brutal siege. By February 1905, Russian General Alexei Kuropatkin had gathered around 300,000 troops at Mukden, Manchuria's capital, hoping for a decisive victory. Japanese Field Marshal Oyama Iwao was advancing with 270,000 men, having committed virtually Japan's entire land army to the fight. The Battle of Mukden would become the largest land battle in world history up to that point. Over 600,000 soldiers fighting across a front stretching 90 miles, both sides had modern weapons, magazine rifles, quick-firing artillery, machine guns, barbed wire, and trenches. But the Japanese had one critical advantage the Russians didn't fully understand. A telephonic indirect fire network. Traditional artillery doctrine required guns to be placed on high ground with a clear line of sight to the target. Gunners aimed with their own eyes, adjusted based on what they saw, and fired directly. This made artillery batteries easy to spot, and easy to destroy. Throughout the 19th century, artillery crews suffered enormous casualties precisely because their guns had to be exposed to be effective. The Japanese changed this completely. They had studied European artillery theory, particularly German and French developments, and then turned those ideas into practical battlefield systems. Japanese commanders positioned their heavy guns miles behind mountains and ridges, in valleys where no enemy could ever see them. Then they ran miles of insulated copper telephone wire from those gun positions forward to observation posts on the peaks above. A single forward observer with a telescope and a field telephone. Technology only recently small enough to carry into the field, could see Russian positions clearly while remaining nearly invisible himself. Every Japanese infantry regiment and artillery division was equipped with telephone sets, creating a communication network unlike anything seen on a battlefield before. Telephone crews laid thousands of yards of wire across Manchurian terrain, linking hidden battery positions to forward observers on the heights above. This meant one observer could coordinate fire from several batteries at once, concentrating enormous firepower on a single target. The method was built on precise mathematics. The observer measured the exact coordinates of Russian positions using a compass, range-finding tools, and trigonometry. He phoned those numbers to battery commanders miles away. The gunners, who couldn't see their targets at all, used the coordinates to calculate the right elevation, the right angle, the right powder charge. They fired over mountains they had never seen, at enemies they could not observe. The observer watched where the shells landed and called back corrections. Add 50 meters. Left 2 degrees. The gunners adjusted and fired again. Within minutes, they had zeroed in with devastating accuracy on targets far beyond their own line of sight. The system was especially effective against Russian artillery, which was still positioned the old way, up on hilltops, perfectly visible to Japanese observers, but completely unable to locate the hidden Japanese guns to return fire. The Battle of Mukden opened on February 20th. Japanese forces launched massive flanking attacks on both sides of the Russian line, attempting to encircle the entire army. Russian artillery, sitting exposed on hilltops in plain view of Japanese observers, was systematically destroyed in the opening hours. Witnesses reported that Japanese forward observers, using their telephones, knocked out most Russian artillery within the first 10 minutes of serious contact. The Russians, still relying on direct fire, couldn't find the Japanese batteries to shoot back. Their guns were out in the open, perfect targets. The Japanese guns were nowhere to be seen. The fighting lasted 3 weeks across an almost unimaginable scale. Japanese forces fired over 20 million rifle and machine gun rounds and nearly 280,000 artillery shells, more ammunition than had been used in the entire Franco-Prussian War. On March 10, Kuropatkin ordered a general retreat northward. Russian casualties approached 90,000. Japanese losses were also severe, but they had won a decisive victory. The Russians lost most of their artillery, heavy equipment, and supplies. The consequences were enormous. Japan had defeated a major European power and forced Russia to accept humiliating peace terms in September 1905. But the tactical lessons proved just as important as the political ones. Military observers from Germany, Britain, France, Austria, and the United States had all been watching Mukden closely. What the Japanese had demonstrated was clear. Artillery could operate from complete concealment, delivering accurate and devastating fire without ever exposing the guns or their crews. The idea spread quickly. By the time World War I began, every major army had adopted indirect fire as its standard artillery doctrine. Forward observers, fire direction centers, coordinate-based targeting, concealed battery positions, all of it traces back to what the Japanese developed and proved in Manchuria. Sometimes a revolution in warfare isn't about louder guns or bigger shells. Sometimes it's about copper wire, mathematics, and the simple understanding that you don't need to see the enemy to destroy them.